All right, why don't we get started? It's right around 3 o'clock. Is this a little loud or is it okay? It's good? Okay. My name is Dave Frosley. Welcome to Migrating Overlayered Code to Extensions. I'll introduce myself and my co-presenters a little bit more in a couple slides. So today we're going to talk about app extensibility more than anything else. So really I want you to take away what it is, more importantly, why we're talking about it, and plus we're going to get into some how-tos, how to go about doing it, and how you should be thinking about extensions moving forward and not overlayering moving forward. So that's really the gist of today's session. We'll give you some background. We'll give you the roadmap, which I'm sure all of you are really interested to hear about, some categories, and then, like we said, some patterns, and last we'll talk about some plan enhancements because some of you have been dealing in this space already, and you're interested to see how we're going to progress both the platform and the app to enable this moving forward. So my name, like I said, is Dave Frosley. I work on the application team. I'm based out of Fargo. So I'm kind of coordinating along with some folks in Copenhagen on the supply chain team and the teams, the financials and human resources team in Fargo, along with some service industry folks trying to coordinate the application changes for this activity and driving requirements and working with partners and things like that. And then we have yours, who is on the solution architect team, and as many of you know, not too far removed from the partner ecosystem, so he's well versed in this topic and has been a great resource for us as we've been working through this. And then Robert here, who's led the charge on the platform team and is still leading the charge on the platform team as we've moved from an overlaying model to an extensibility model, and he's got tons of experience as well. So we've got kind of the complete set of resources here today to talk to you about this. So I'm going to spend about the first half hour, give or take a little bit, talking about the roadmap and the categories and what we know about overlaying in the ecosystem. But first, we're going to spend a few minutes just talking about why this is important. So really, this is part of the theme that we have about improving implementation time and reducing the cost of upgrade. So all of you are well aware of the challenges that we have in the ecosystem as customers move from earlier versions to later versions, or even going through the implementation process. And we really want to reduce that friction so that things go more smoothly, and this is one of the initiatives that we have in that space. So eliminating overlayer puts us on this journey to continuous upgrade, continuous update, which is more or less where we are with the platform at this point. Now the platform is accelerating its rate of releases, pushing out more incremental changes more quickly, and innovating more quickly to get code into customers' hands. And that's really a big theme here. So you guys have seen some of the demos. I mean, I saw for the first time last week some of the analytics integration that we have with finance and other areas. And there's some really cool stuff that's happening. And we don't want customers and partners to be stranded on old code and not being able to take advantage of these innovations as we develop them, as partners develop them, and even as customers implement improvements. So that's a big thing with us, is we want to be able to have the entire ecosystem innovating together and uptaking this code as we move forward. We also want to reduce the total cost of ownership. We know that every time an upgrade comes along, it can be a big costly venture, from updating code to for customizations in order to uptake changes in Microsoft or ISV code, to the testing effort, to, you know, it's almost a re-implementation in some cases. So that's another objective. And then the third objective has to do with quality. And we're going to talk some about what the idea of an intrusive customization and how extensibility is just a better model from an engineering standpoint. And that's our goal, is to get a better engineered solution in the end that's going to have higher quality, that the things that change are more under control and require less testing, and ultimately have a better result for everyone. So that's kind of the theme. Think about it, I guess, 2 takeaways. It's a journey. We're still early in the journey. The platform team has led the way in the last year, and we're moving forward with that journey. And all along, we want to reduce friction so that upgrades and implementations go faster. Okay, so just a little bit of terminology. It's just to make sure we're on the same page. So sometimes we use the word sealing, and we really should say sealing for overlayering, because we're not saying that there's no customization anymore. We're saying that extensions are the way to customize going forward. And there's 2 levels of sealing when we talk about sealing. The first one is a soft seal, which is basically like deprecating. So when you change an API in .NET, you put an obsolete attribute and you're deprecating that capability, which is a notification to the users that this is going to go away in the future. So the first step that we have in our efforts to seal models is the soft seal, where we generate a compiler warning whenever that model's overlayered. The next level is a hard seal, which basically is a compiler error, design time, and also we'll probably be doing something around configuration when you actually implement that we don't have support for overlayering in the packages that get delivered. So that's a hard seal. So those are the 2 levels that we're going to go through, and the 2 levels that the app platform and app foundation models went through in the past year. So here's the roadmap. So first of all, the disclaimer, this isn't finalized. We're looking for details to come out in May to finalize this roadmap, but this is the plan of record at this time, and this is the targets that we have. So like I've been saying, the kernel, the app platform, app foundation, they're all hard sealed as of November 2016. The app suite core models or common models, things like dimension, directory, case management, ledger, subledger, source doc types, that core tier models that sits below the app suite, we're looking to soft seal in the spring release, this release that's coming up. Those models don't get a lot of overlaying at this point, and we're looking to address the gaps in those models before the spring release, and that will set us up for a hard seal in the fall release of 2017. And then we have the app suite, which even though it's by far the biggest box, it should be really a lot bigger if we were going to look at what's in that particular model. The target there is to soft seal that in the fall with a hard seal in the spring release of 2018, so on the order of 15 months from now. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that with our support policy, we do have a 3-year support model for any given release. So the fall release has a 3-year support model if there's overlaying that you have in that system. So it's not like there will be no overlaying in the system in 15 months. Those releases will be supported for that time period, but it does mean that those innovations don't get uptaken. Yes?
What does it mean 3 years support? Does it mean it's not supported after 3 years, or you force an update after 3 years?
I'm not real well versed in the support models. Do you know, Robert?
It means it will not support it. So practically, if you're on the 2017 release here and you still have overlaying, you will be supported until 2020 without support.
Yeah, just like there's customers running AX4 today.
Frankly, it's a new era for this world, right? We haven't reached that stage yet. What does running in a Microsoft cloud without having support, how it's going to look like for an ERP system? But it means you will not have support. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not try to get there. But Robert hit on a theme that I didn't really emphasize as much as I wanted to in the previous slide. I mean, this is all part of our cloud journey as well, right? I mean, we're moving closer and closer to being a true SaaS offering where we have more frequent updates and upgrades that are seamless, and that's the goal. So this is a huge project for us, for Microsoft internally, and you'll get a feel for that in the coming slides. And it's obviously a huge project for many and everyone in this audience probably. Question, Tommy?
Yeah, are you happy with the size of that suite, or do you think you will split up?
That's not.
So
Oh,
the
sorry.
question is, are we happy with the current size of the application suite model, and if we have plans to split it
Yeah, there's
further?
two questions there, right?
I think it's the second question he cares for.
He cares about the second one, yeah. Splitting up the app suite is not a priority as part of this project. The priority is enabling extensibility from a Microsoft standpoint, so that's the focus. Yeah, would we love it to be a little bit smaller, more granular, and more componentized? Sure, but it's not the priority. Okay, I'm going to keep moving along here. So priority-wise, because this is such a large project, both for us and the ecosystem, we're focused on two subsets of the ecosystem right now. First of all is the ISV solutions and the ISVs that are on our AppSource site. So we've already started some partner engagements with those individuals, and you'll see some data from those as well here briefly. And secondly is new customers. We want to just kind of keep the technical debt down in the ecosystem overall as we move forward. So that's the second focus. So speaking of insights, we have this wonderful capability of telemetry these days, and I've spent a lot of my time at Microsoft in the test and quality function, and this is just it's a panacea of information, which is wonderful because we've never had this before. But it can be a little bit overwhelming too, and we get multiple sources and sources that have different perspectives and insights. Some are valid, some less valid. So I'm going to kind of summarize this a little bit just to put some context on some of the slides I'm going to talk about. Not so much to go into a lot of detail, but there's three sources that we have for getting customization information. There's the code upgrade, which comes from the code upgrade tool that you use through LCS. There's runtime package customizations, which is something that got put into Platform Update 3, where as packages are deployed, we pull some extension and overlayer information out of those packages and collect that data into some Power BI reports. And then the third circle on the bottom is the customization analysis reports, or CAR, that we get from ISVs as they move, as part of the curation process for a solution going into AppSource. So each of these has some benefits and some drawbacks. If you look at the code upgrade submissions, that's got a lot of really detailed, granular information, which is great, but sometimes we don't know where the source is. If say a customer coming from 2012 or 2009 submits this code for the first time, there's a lot of overlaying that we don't know if it's real or not, right? I mean, could it easily be moved to extensions with some work? And we're really looking for the information that tells us where are the blocking issues? What are the things that we need to do from Microsoft's perspective to enable extensibility? So that's the downside of that. The runtime package customizations, that's more current, right? We know that these are deployments. It's very customer focused. It could be a dev test deployment. It could be a sandbox deployment. It could be a prod. But we know this is real life data. The downside of that is that it's a little bit chunky. We know what elements are being overlayered. So we know what a class is being overlayered, but we don't have the detail. We don't know what methods within that class are being overlayered. So that's a little bit of a gap there. And then the customization analysis reports, that gives us the most accurate data because we know what version they apply to, and we know who the source is, and we know that source is serious about working with Microsoft because they're trying to get onto AppSource. So we've been using that more than anything else, just as a primary source of information to guide our analysis and our initial work here. It provides only overlayer information. We don't see where people are extending, but it does give us good detail and good accuracy. So that's the three sources. So I'm going to spend three slides just talking about what those sources tell us. First one is the AppSource ISV insights. So the top bar graph just shows you number of submissions per day. So These are spreadsheets you submit. For those not familiar, you submit a spreadsheet per model that you are going to have as part of your application. That model could be something containing overlaying, or it could be something that's completely new, a completely new model. And you can see that we get anywhere from 1 to 20, 25 of those on a given day, and we've aggregated all this information into a Power BI report. The bottom pie chart shows you the breakdown of the ISVs, not the apps, but the ISVs, and how many overlayered elements they have. So if you look at the blue and the orange on the right, that tells us that almost half of the ISVs have less than 20 overlayered elements. So really in really great shape for our initiative here. And then on the left-hand side, you have a smaller number with some fairly large numbers. So we have 5 that have over 500 overlayered elements, a pretty big chunk with 100 to 500, and some more with 20 to 100. So we have the split of some ISVs that are in pretty good shape and some that have quite a bit of work to do. And on the quite a bit of work to do, some have done quite a bit of work already and got it down to a manageable level, but they need some help from Microsoft to go to that final bit, and we're working with partners on that. As far as where these overlayered elements are, we have the ability to map it to parts of the product with some internal tooling that we have. So SEM, supply chain, has the vast majority, probably about 2/3. It's probably a little hard to read towards the back. And that's blue up there and green on my screen. I think it's blue. But the big box is obviously SEM. The sub box on the left, that's the largest, that's sales, if you're curious. And then the reddish color on the upper right is GFM, and the blackish color is service industry. So 2/3 SEM, and then the remaining third split between GFM and SI is how you should think about that. And then on the bottom, it shows us the element types, and it's classes, tables, and forms in that order that we're seeing as overlayered. And you can just see the breakdown per group within that. So hopefully this isn't too surprising to anybody in the audience, but...
And I want to add here, the reason we're focusing on app source, because these are it's a small number, around 50.
Yeah.
But we think the ISV code is going to be quite intrusive and quite representative. So if we solve initially the problem for ISVs, the same problems will probably apply to the entire ecosystem of partners and customers and so on. So this is why there's a special focus on ISVs in AppSource right now.
And the other aspect of that too is that we need ISV solutions to kind of lead the way to some extent. If we're going to have customers deploy with little to no overlaying in their ISV solutions, they obviously need to have those ISV solutions to be in good shape. Okay, so I'm just going to give you one more piece of data to talk about, and this is the runtime package telemetry insights. So I'm changing the data source. This again is information that's pulled out of the packages as they're deployed through LCS. There's a fair amount of duplication in this data, meaning that a given organization, given deployment, could deploy 20, 30 times because they're deploying every day to some different environments and things like that. So it's not so important to look at the total counts with this data, but it's interesting to look at the percentage of extension versus overlayer. And that's what the pie chart on the bottom shows. The orange is the overlayered and the green is the extension. So we're getting close to half and half, where we're seeing as many extensions as overlayer. That actually is quite a bit better than what we saw 2 or 3 months ago. So whether it's just a sample that we're seeing right now in the customers, or if we're seeing actual improvement, we'll see. We'll watch that trend over time, but it's at least going in the right direction. The top just shows the number of tenants that are deployed every day. So the last number there is 145. So up to 150 tenants are being deployed every day, and we're pulling that information from those packages that go into those tenants. And then the bottom right shows each bar, it represents an organization. So the thing to look at there is the ratio of green, which is extensions, to orange, which is overlayered. And you see a number of organizations have mostly green, and you see some that have a pretty big chunk of orange at this point. And again, just kind of looking at the ratios is what I want you to focus on, not necessarily the overall volume. So again, kind of this mixed thing where we have some ISV solutions and some implementations that are pretty good shape from an overlayer standpoint. We have others that need a fair amount of work. Okay, next is just talking about some common extensibility challenges. I'll go through 3 slides of this. First of all is enumerations that aren't extensible. So by default, enums were not extensible, and the reason for that is because as soon as you make an enum extensible, you no longer can depend on the value that is behind the enum. And if any place in code depended on that value, you're going to break code. So by default, we didn't have the option to make them all extensible. So we've actually made quite a bit of progress on this in the last couple of months. This has been a focus area for us for a couple of reasons. One is that the data is very real and easy to get to. We see where enums are being overlayered and we can go attack those. 2, it does lead us into code and it helps us understand what the refactoring we need to do from a code perspective in order to enable some of these scenarios. So if you look at the chart, again, this goes back to the app source ISVs. Each bar represents an enum, and the height of the bar is the number of publishers or ISVs that are using that enum. So you see the first one, which is quotation type, has 6 different ISVs that are using that. And it's blue, which means that it has not been made extensible yet. So that's something we've got to get to fairly soon, obviously. But you can see that a number of the bars are orange, which 2 months ago, none of them were orange. So we've been making some progress. In fact, we're at about 800 enums that are extensible at this point, going from virtually none in 7.1, except for some platform ones where we need to do this as we seal the platform. So it's really been based on 2 things. What we see as a top priority, like what we're seeing in this chart, and where we've done some analysis to identify enums that don't have any code impact. So wherever we have an understanding that this enum is not used in a way that would, moving it to be extensible would break any code, we just made that extensible so we don't have to worry about that. So we're at 800 with that at this point. Oh, question? I'm sorry.
What's the reason that any DEV extension would break code?
So the challenge is when you add a value and multiple ISVs add values to enums, how do you sequence that if it was just an integer? So we actually, with extensible enums, they're actually the value of that is actually determined at deployment or at sync time, DB sync time. And so a given implementation can have actually different values for the enums.
There's actually a very technical .NET reason as well. In .NET, an enum type is not extensible. It just, the platform doesn't support it. So when you switch an enum from a regular enum to an extensible enum in operations, the underlying .NET artifact becomes a static class. It's actually changing type, and that changing of type, we couldn't afford just blankly change everything without basically making sure it's a safe change on the code we have and so on. So we have a lot of places so when you change the type to that static class, instead of using enum integer values, now you have variables in that class from a .NET perspective, and these variables don't have integer values associated with them. So there's data upgrade impacts, there is impact on things like if you have in the code any logic that depends on the actual integer value and so on. So that's one of the reasons we couldn't just make all of them extensible and move on.
It's been a pretty big headache, is the bottom line. So, but we think we're well on the way to where we need to be with that. So the second challenge is methods. So methods are overlayered for a number of reasons. First one is we have a lot of long methods in the product, multi-hundred lines, littered with switch statements and if statements. And even though we have pre and post events that you can add event handlers to and build extensions, that's not enough, obviously, in a lot of cases. So there are a lot of situations where we're going to have to either refactor those methods into smaller methods where pre and post will make sense, or add delegates at the right place in order to enable that. We have method signatures that are overlayered, and I'm going to talk about intrusive customizations in the next slide, and this is an example of that where we don't have a good solution to support that, nor do we want to support that, so that's going to be a sticky point as we move forward. We have issues with protected methods, so if you create a class extension or class augmentation, you can access protected methods or members. We're actually looking at some solutions to make that better so that you don't have to overlayer just to make the type non-protected. We have SQL in code, which if you want to add a where clause or add another join or things like that, you have to overlayer today. Another example of a fairly intrusive customization that we don't have a solution yet for. We have alternatives, but the alternatives don't work in all situations, so we're continuing to look at that a little bit more. We have some construct methods, some factory methods that throw on the default as opposed to being supportive of additional types that could be passed in, so that's a common thing, a fairly straightforward pattern for us to change is another example. So yeah, we're working on some different things. I've already talked about those. For those of you in the back, looking again at the AppSource ISV sales line table, sales table form, invent dim, sales line type, sales table are the top examples of classes that are overlayered in the system. And we have a number of other things that we have challenges, and we're going to talk about more of these later on, where we have gaps in metadata-based extensions where you have to overlayer because we don't have support for something. There's some events that were in 2012 that don't have extension hook points in AX7 that we're adding back in, given the telemetry that we see now. They weren't added in because we weren't seeing much use of that at the time. We have some issues with maps. We have the pack-unpack pattern. All these we have some proposals for, and we'll go into a little bit further. Some things that we can't fix, so macros. I understand this to be Peter Villadsen's favorite feature in the whole language. That's what I've heard. Macros are not going to be extensible. We can't figure out what that even means. So, and then we have this idea of intrusive customizations, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So, as we've evolved in our discussions internally about this topic, we're starting to get crisper on some terminology and things like that, and some principles. So, just recently, we've got more well-defined on what we mean by an intrusive customization, which is pretty straightforward. It's a friction-producing thing in our overall ecosystem. It limits our goal of continuous update, our long-term goal of that, and it causes friction because whenever an intrusive customization exists, it means a fair amount of work for our partners and our customers. So there's kind of three software engineering-oriented principles. For a non-intrusive customization, it shouldn't change the type definition. So we don't want method signature changes. We don't want return type changes, things like that. That's a problem. We don't want to break encapsulation because we need to be able to move the product forward. ISVs need to be able to move their products forward. And the way you do that is by controlling your private implementations. And just in general, things need to be additive in nature, right? We don't want things to be replacing functionality in the product. So if you look at some examples, overlayering is not additive, right? I mean, it's replacing functionality. So that's kind of the fundamental thing that we're after here. Changing method signatures, you're changing the type definition, so that fails the test. Changing table constraints, including indexes, changes the type definition again, and that's a problem. Indexes, I know, are a challenge, but it's a challenge from our standpoint just because those are things that ensure the performance that we need in the system, but we know there are cases where there's real needs for that to change as well, so we're going to have some conversations with people where there's real needs to do that type of change. Method access modifiers, breaks encapsulation. You make a protected or private public. That's no longer something that we have free control over. Change return with delegate handlers is not additive. There's this idea of the Liskov's substitution principle, which basically means if you substitute functionality, it has to behave as the other functionality, even though the implementation might be different. It's one of the solid software engineering principles. And basically, if you don't meet Liskov, you're not being additive at that point. And the SQL statements in X++ code, again, that's not an additive type scenario. So we have a number of these examples. And what do you do when we have these? So first of all, there's lots of opportunities to refactor code. And Joris is going to give you some examples here in a couple of minutes where you move things from being non-intrusive, which might be inline code, to something that's more additive in nature. So that's the first thing. And we have lots of examples from partners who've been investing in this for a year plus and have made that mind shift to go to extension-based solutions. Resolution 2 is you take that as far as you can, which a number of partners have. That's where we want to work with you to try to figure out what the gap is. If it's a long method that needs refactoring more delegates, if it's an enum that needs to be made extensible, all these things are things that we want to have conversations and ways to discuss and collaborate on this. And we'll talk a little bit at the end how we want to do that from an engagement model. But there is scenarios where it's just the solution that's in play is intrusive. And going forward, it's probably not going to be a viable solution or implementation. And that's where we're going to have some more conversations in general as well when those things come up. But we know there are going to be cases like this where we have things that just don't fit the model of a cloud solution. And those are going to be hard decisions and conversations to have, but for the long-term good of the ecosystem, it's something that we need to do. Okay. I think we're doing about right for time. So yours.
All right, that works. All right, I still have to connect here. So the point that I'm trying to make, I got a lot of feedback when we did this session earlier. I think one code example I'm just not going to show because people got offended, I guess. But the point of these examples is really just not to have you, go through the code and try to analyze what I did. The point is just try and make you think about what does it mean when we talk about refactoring, and what are the kind of things that traditionally people are thinking that, this is an overlayering. There's no way to do this in extensions. The point is really, if you are refactoring, to go back to, we see a lot of code that has come from AX3 to 4 to 2009 to 2012. It's now coming into 7. In some cases that I've worked with ISVs where they have a particular piece of code and they say, how the hell do we move this to an extension? And then my question is, but what is this even trying to do? And they can't explain it, right? So the point being is there are things that are going to be hard, and there are things that you really want to think about. What is it that I was trying to do here, and can I refactor it in a more logical way? So I just wanted to show you a couple of examples. This is a typical example, and actually this one here. Can you see that? It's zoomed. Can you see in the back? Is that okay? All right. So this is essentially some code on a table, right? So this is actually, if you're interested, this is the insert method on a customer table. So you see there's a lot of code in here, there's a lot of code in there, and I've actually added a customization here in between. What this does is, there's some code in this insert method that is setting some fields, doing all sorts of things, and then I've added a customization in here that says, okay, that field that just got set there, if it has a certain value, I want to do something. This is a typical customization where code is inserted somewhere right in the middle of some existing code. In this case, and I'll admit on tables, there's some great features that'll help this. But obviously, a table has a super call that actually does the actual insert or update or delete. These super calls actually generate platform events as well. So there is, wow, do you want to finish? I think I'll say later, yeah. So the super call will actually do a call or emit an on-inserting event. Then it'll do the database operations. And then it'll throw an on-inserted event. I can hook into these, right, with event handlers. We still have the pre and post handlers that exist that were introduced in AX 2012, which means if you look at a block of code on an insert or update or delete method, you essentially have several opportunities to insert customizations based on handlers. I could add code prior to the whole thing executed. I could do it right after the whole thing executed. But sometimes, for example, you have a TTS begin and commit around the super call. I want to be inside of that one with my customization. At that point, I can hook into the super calls events that it emits, right? Which allows me to essentially, this code, for example, I could add as an event handler here. And the point here is there's still code executed after my customization, which this piece was the original code. But it doesn't matter logically for what I'm trying to do, right? So this is a typical example of trying to think, okay, I have this code here, but it's just because this other code was prior. I can refactor this and add it as a handler just because of the way these handlers work. So there's some reasoning that you want to do as far as how is the flow of the existing code? How does my customization fit in here? And can I work with other existing handlers? Or does it make sense that it's actually customized in this place? Can I put it somewhere else? So this is a typical example. We see this a lot, especially on the insert and update stuff where, especially with the transactions going on, people want to, this is a very, very typical one. And just to give you an idea of what that would look like, the way that these system handlers work in AX7 is essentially as opposed to in 2012 where you added an event subscription on the element itself in AOT. We've cleanly separated that, which means the code that handles the event is just decorated with an attribute, and that way it's cleanly separated. I'm not touching the original code. I'm just saying this particular piece of code will actually handle the insert data event type of the customer table. So it's a pretty clean separation, and my code has moved that way. A different example here, this piece of code, coincidentally, this is also on the customer table, but anyway, the standard code just had this if statement where it said if some condition, and I've actually customized it with an or here. You can add an end, whatever. This is also a typical customization where people get stuck and say, I'm actually changing the functionality. I want to change this if statement. How do I do this with an extension? Again, here you want to go back to what is it I'm trying to do. You're actually calling a piece of code based on a condition. And you're essentially saying, well, if my other condition is true, I want to call this code as well. This is obviously a clean example because it's one statement. But in this case, same thing. I could take this or statement out entirely and add it in a handler and just add this if statement and say if customer group, and then call the same piece of code. So again, these logic flows, you want to think about what is it, why did I put it here? Is there a reason? Could I put it somewhere else? Can I take it out? And if so, can I do a handler? That's the kind of refactoring of code that we see. On the metadata side, of course, it's easier, changing labels and some properties. But the code is really where you need to focus on refactoring. Yes? I'll admit this is an easy example. I'm sorry? If you change it to an end, yes. But then the question becomes, okay, that's fair. But then can I hook into this delete from cust? Can I go look at that method to see if there's something I can do there as far as pre or post handlers to negate or so I'll freely admit this is an easy example and the or was carefully chosen. That's absolutely true. But the point is really these logic flows, and it's actually a good example, right? The and, then the question is, can I go to this delete from cust? And is there some hook point there that I can avoid, right? I'm sorry? Right? Yeah, so your point is, from a functional point of view, in this case, if both of the sides of the OR statement would end up true, it would call this method twice, I guess is your point. And you're absolutely correct, right? But that's exactly what I want, right? I want you to think about these things because, you know, these are code examples, but the point is the logic flows is really where people get stuck. The if statements, where did I insert it, why is it in the middle, could it be done in the front, could it be done in the end? Those are the types of examples. Absolutely true, the delete here would have been executed twice, but based on the code, that may actually not be an issue either. So it depends, right? There was an issue here in the front as well. Yeah, okay, yes. If it's called twice, yes. Right.
You check to see if it's deleted first in your extension, and if it is, it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, there's things. I mean, this is just. I randomly picked this particular piece of code, right? And it's a valid statement. The point is just that's exactly what you should be doing, is reason about these things and think back to what it is I'm trying to do, what are the effects, and can I refactor it? We've gotten a lot of questions where people say, here's my code, I copied it into a handler, how do I put it in? And typically, in a lot of cases, that's not the answer. You can't just copy paste the code into a separate class and be done. There's probably some more things you need to think about as far as where do I put it, how do I put it, and how does it fit in with this code? And was that even the initial intention?
And there will be cases like Dave mentioned where you go to the next level where you ask Microsoft for an event.
Right.
And there'll be hopefully less cases where you just have to drop that customization and think of the functional requirements in a different way.
Yep.
But, so we are not under any impression that removing overlaying has zero cost on anybody. So that's basically what Dave was referring to in the previous slides, in the 3 levels of cases, basically.
Well, independent of cost and the long-term objectives, do you think that we can actually do the same thing? Can we obtain the same result?
Yes, the question is, will you be able to do the same thing?
Not the same way.
Exactly. So the goal is to let you do as much as possible while keeping this a cloud service that is upgradable and serviceable. So the quick answer is no. We're not going to let you go into a method and actually yank out the code out of it if that's what you're doing. But there will be correct. But slowly you're going to see more and more features. I'm actually going to tackle this right in after Joris's small demo here, where I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing, especially on the language side, not necessarily on the metadata side. But give me a second.
So the final example I wanted to show, and Dave had it was one of the bullet points. One of the patterns we've seen a lot is the pack and unpack pattern, where people are hooking into existing code and want to add their own state to the packed and unpacked containers, right? It's a typical example of something that you can't easily do with extensions because in most cases, and this actually, I guess, is over the years been our best practice, there's usually believe it or not, a macro that defines the list of variables that go into the container. By definition, those things you just cannot extend, right? There's ways around that, obviously, as if you're a customer and you just want to add stuff to the container, that's easy enough to do. But the problem really becomes, let's say you have 2 ISVs that you're installing and they both want to add something to the container. This is still event handler driven, which means it's .NET. There's no guarantee of the ordering of the handlers. So based on how one ISV gets executed to put their stuff in the packed container and how it gets pulled back out, we may have an ordering issue. So essentially, the serialization has become a problem there. So what we're trying to do there is tackle that by a pattern that will support with some extra code. So just to give you an idea, no, this is not it. Here we go. So this is a typical example. This is an augmentation class, for those of you who are familiar with that in AX7. So essentially, there's an existing class called run-based-batch-test. And this class is defined as an extension, an augmentation class on top of that. So those are new paradigms in 7, and definitely encourage you to look at those. But this is a typical example. I want to add my own state to that pack and unpack method, right? So the pattern, and these are things that we're coming up with as we find these and working with ISVs on workaround patterns. And we'll document these things, so expect those to, and Dave will touch on that with our wiki. what we're encouraging ISVs to do is just to create their own pack and unpack methods that do whatever it is they need to do. Then from the framework perspective, we will actually have a special method that ISVs can call. So they will essentially add a post handler, which is the same post handler you know from 2012, to an existing pack method. And in that handler, they'll tell that base class, I want to pack my extension stuff. What's going to happen in the background is essentially on our framework side, we'll keep track of which class added what piece so that we can also unpack it in the correct order. And that's the handler on the other side, where essentially we'll have a post handler for unpack, and it does the exact same thing where it asks the base class, can you unpack my extension stuff? It'll return the container, and then I can deal with it. So this is an example of where, you know, if we would want, we could obviously get rid of these macros, but that would be a tremendous amount of work to change the way we've done run-based pack for ages. We'd be breaking all customers and ISVs out there. There's no easy solution. So in this case, we're coming up with some best practice, a pattern, and some support on the framework to essentially get past this issue.
So this particular one, I believe, is coming in Platform Update 5, which is going to be the next update to the platform.
Yes.
And I just want to add one thing to what Joris is saying. So it also addresses the previous question, and your question, hopefully it addresses it. Instead of looking at solutions at the code level, like, oh, this code was added here, our telemetry is helping us a lot. We know what methods, we know every single method that's being overlaid. And instead of saying, oh, how are we going to allow this particular method to be extended without being overlaying, we realize a huge chunk of them, oh, people are basically serializing and deserializing. So let's solve pack and unpack. So this is the approach we're taking for a lot of these. So this was a direct result of this. We saw a lot of method being overlaid, but when we actually dig deeper, we're saying, this is not just overlaying for changing an if statement. People are actually using pack and unpack to change serialization and deserialization. So we said, okay, we're going to solve serialization. And we will address them in these types of patterns as they come. And that's one of the reasons we're giving ourselves and everybody in this room enough time to deal with this.
So, and the point there is there's essentially three pillars, right, to solve some of these issues people are running into. One is platform support, right? Do we actually need a new technical or a language feature to be able to do what you need to do? Number two is, can we work, that would be on Robert. Number two is, can we work with Dave and the app team? Is there code refactoring we need to do? Add delegates, split methods, those types of things to support it. And then third, there may be patterns. Maybe it's a matter of us saying, here's how you address this particular issue. Here's the pattern to use to get past these things. And then the fourth issue is there may just be things that we end up saying this is just not possible, and that we'll have to deal with those as we find those.
So, as you can tell, it's a very simple problem we have to solve this year.
Yeah. Right. So, Dave, that's what I had as far as demos. I think, does that clicker not work? There we go.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Joris. So what I'm going to talk about right now is, there's a lot of our telemetry led us to realize we still have some lack of support on the platform side. So it's not just a matter of our own application engineers changing X++ code and adding delegates. We're still lacking some support on the platform side. And I'm going to start with a disclaimer. This is not a commitment to do something. I'm just showing everybody, we're being transparent, what the plan of record is today. Because we might hit some cases where enabling this ends up being an intrusive customization, so we might take it out of that list. But this is what the plan of records looks today based on telemetry, discussions, and so on. So we think on the platform side, we are lacking support from a metadata perspective for the following. On table fields, there are 4 properties that are customized a lot based on telemetry. We still don't support it via extensions. I have the 4 of them here: allow edit on create, edit, ignore EDT relation, EDT type. A couple of these are controversial. That's why it's not a commitment if we're going to support it by extensions or not, but it's what we're saying. Extending a map, but only here adding a field to a map that we don't support yet because we already support via extensions adding a table mapping. So, but we do see a lot of customizations where folks are actually changing the actual interface by adding a field to an existing map. The third one is form patterns. We do allow you to add things to form, which is a great feature and is being used a lot based on telemetry. But then sometimes you go and add a tab and you get an error that this doesn't fit the UX pattern anymore. So yeah, we allow you to add, but then you can't compile it. So we're gonna add this feature where after adding something to a form, adding a tab or any control, you change its pattern to custom. So it'll allow you to proceed and say, okay, it's a custom pattern. I'm not within the UX regular patterns, but I can extend that form. Table relation, adding a field to a table relation is something that is customized a lot. Changing the value of a query range, disabling a query range. These are also bordering on the intrusive side. So we might rethink them, but this is customized a lot. Tooling. We will work on tooling that allows you to move from overlaying to extensions faster. This is not going to be magic. It's really hard to replace a human in a lot of these cases. So, but there are cases where it's possible, to move additive things like table fields and so on to extensions. So we'll be working on tooling either on the code upgrade side, because as you know, there's a code upgrade service in LCS that will give you a head start, changing things into extensions, or within Visual Studio itself, where you will be able to do some. But there will still be cases where you have to, or a lot of cases, especially when you deal with code, where you actually have to write code, an actual developer. And some other things worth mentioning is country region code is heavily customized. There's a lot of partners that simply add localization logic to the application. And right now, via extensions, you cannot change that property. We're going to provide an additive way where you can actually say, okay, I'm doing a localization for this particular country, and you'll change the country region code on some menu items to say I'm supporting now this country or this locale, and etc. And simple change like changing the color on a grid line is quite common, but it's strange enough that today you have to change code to do that. So this is one more thing that we saw is common. On the code and event handling side, there are some events that are still missing on the framework level. Some validate event on data source, on form data sources and form data source fields. There is some support we have on tables that we don't have fully on the form data sources, things like validation events and so on. Lookup events on form data source field, some pre-init event on the form data source as well. We also need support for table edit and display methods when you use class extensions. Right now, we force you to use static methods for those. And also, we saw a lot of cases where even though you're extending, but you want to undo a click event. So based on a certain condition, you want clicking on a button to actually execute your method versus going to the actual default click methods. So we're going to think of support for that via events. So in a nutshell, this is where we're thinking for these incrementally small, what I would call them small features, to allow you to extend more. And this is not considering 80%, I would say, of the work, Dave, that's going to happen on the application side, where the actual X++ code, and Dave is going to tackle this. This is just the framework. Now, what I want to get to is the third slide. And this is basically the bulk of the work we're going to be doing over the next couple of months, I would say, or more on the platform side. And I wish I could share more about this, because a lot of the stuff that we're going to do in this area are actually patentable, and we're not allowed to even talk about how it's going to look like. But I can share with you the requirements that we're going to work against, and and any feedback on it is great. We're looking at a lot of customization patterns in X++ code and so on, and we're even looking at the current support and events, and we do see there's a lot, like, it doesn't all flow together. There's event handlers here, class extensions there, form extensions there, and so on. We wanted a fundamentally new feature that actually takes all of the requirement and puts them in an elegant way. And we're even thinking here of a new X++ feature, like something more creative, and it's fundamental to the language. And we want to make class extensions better, and these are the requirements we're thinking of. We want to allow you to add pre and post logic on public and non-final protected methods. You can tell me, yes, event handlers pre and post exist today, but they're only static and they have a lot of limitations. And I'm using the word logic here, not event handlers, on purpose because it might not be event handler, it might be something totally new. But this is the requirement we're working against. So you're adding pre and post logic on public and protected methods. You want access to public and protected variables and methods within the class you are extending, only within that class. You want to be able to pass states between those pre and post logic. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the same pre and post logic. You might want to start a state in the pre method of method 1 and then handle some other thing on that, handle that state in the post logic of method 2. So we want to support these types of situations where, and you want to be able to start a transaction and end it within that extensions, also between pre and post logic. Do things like try and catch, also within the pre and post logic of a particular method. Using code, using code blocks, you also will be able, if we get to implement all of the requirements, have a using code block that starts in the pre-logic of a method and actually completes in the post-logic of a method. And last but not least is all of the above without writing ugly glue code. So, and the reason I'm listing this, and this is basically where we want to hear all of your feedback, we do think, with the exception of going into an actual method and messing with the internals of a particular line that we don't want you to mess, line of code that we don't want you to mess with, this seems to satisfy a large majority of all the customizations we have and we want to support. Right now, event handlers don't go that far. That's one of the main reasons we're rethinking it. And we are working on a new design. And as I said, it's a disclaimer at the beginning. It's mostly related to that slide, that this is where we're thinking right now. And hopefully in the next couple of releases of the platform, you start seeing more and more we can expose on this. So I thought it's important to share with you not the design, but the actual requirement behind the design, because this is where it will make everybody think about, okay, are these the requirements I'm going to work under, and so on. So there's a question there. Good. Okay.
Mary?
Yeah.
I know that it seems like if you are able to extend everything and get all of your code really clean, that you'll be able to accept any kind of updates, patches, et cetera, from Microsoft without any harm. However, I am concerned that some of the changes that come in from patches and updates and everything from Microsoft, you still have to go through a great deal of testing before you can accept that, because it could break what you've done in your extension.
Correct. So the question is, sorry.
It's not solving everything.
Absolutely. So the question is, extensions are not a promise that you'll never ever have to compile or test your code every time you get an update. No, but it's a promise that it's going to be much, much cheaper to do so. Because on the platform side, we are promising full functional compatibility and binary compatibility as well. On the application side, this will not be a requirement. So for minor releases will probably be functionally compatible, but for major releases, there will be breaking changes that will drive you to go through a code upgrade service and so on. So it's not going to be click a button, I'm on the latest release of the application. But the goal is to make this experience much, much cheaper.
Okay, yeah, it's about reducing friction overall and continuing on the journey. So just one slide on the application extensibility. Robert was right that 80% of the work is on the application. And I don't know why I have one little slide and he had 3 big slides, but I guess that's the way it works. And the real reason is because there's categories of things that we have to do on the application side. Enums, we're going to continue to open those up. There's method overlayering needs, the constructs with throw and large methods. And then there's some other areas where we have to take a step back and see where we need to add, we need to make functionality extensible in the product. So inventory dimensions is listed here. That's one area where we've been working on a solution for a little while and trying to talk to different partners and ISVs to understand if this is going to meet their needs or not. So that's one area. Pricing is another area that we've spent some time talking with folks, trying to understand, well, what do you really need to be extensible for pricing? Not at a method level or class level, but from a functional level, and then how can we go about implementing something that's going to make some sense for us. So the telemetry gives us some information, and a lot of times we have to take a step back and understand, well, what is the scenario, what is the real functionality that needs to be changed, and then work with folks to make sure that we get that right. So speaking of working with folks, this is the last slide. So we have a number of ways to engage, and we're spending quite a bit of time now working with a fairly small group, and we're gonna, this event is opening it up much larger, obviously. We've talked about this to many more people than we've talked about up until now. There's I don't have the wikis on here, there's really 5 different ways that we are engaging. There's the Yammer groups. The Platform Extensibility Group is a very active Yammer group that is really community driven in a lot of ways. I mean, more often than not, questions get answered by somebody in the community rather than somebody from Microsoft, and that's fantastic. Thank you for those who are pitching into that. That's really terrific to see that. We have a smaller application extensibility group that has a limited set of people in it right now. We're either going to open that up or we're just going to merge these 2 groups to get more people engaged in the conversation going forward. Connect requests, so we have a little bit of work, I think, to do to get everybody the right invite to the right Connect program to make sure that people can do this, but we do have a request type for extensibility feedback. That'll be a way for you to say, hey, I need an extension point here, and that will be managed through Connect. And then we're going to adopt a couple things that the solution architecture team led early on in the AX7 days. It was called AX7 then, so I can say it. Office hours and workshops. So office hours is just basically a time period where we have a Skype meeting set up and we have some expertise from Microsoft on the call where you can just join the call and ask some questions and get some real-time answers. And then there's also workshops, and there's a couple different types of workshops that we're thinking about. In the X7 days, the workshops were more about moving your code forward from previous release. So basically, what are the patterns I need to do to refactor my code from overlayering to an extension model? So for those partners and customers who are early in the process, that's the type of workshop we're talking about, helping you move your code forward. But then there's also some workshops where you've done that work and you need to engage with Microsoft to figure out how do we go that last mile to get all of our code moved from overlayer to extension. So it's more of a deep dive, working one-on-one to figure out how to work through those scenarios. And then last, we have an extensibility homepage in the wiki now that has some content. We have opportunity to add more content there. We have some references out to some blog posts and things like that, but we need to build up these patterns over time to get that wiki much richer going forward with the patterns. So with that, I think we are on to some Q&A. Yeah. Go ahead.
Are new changes, platform changes going to make their way back to 2012, or do we have to maintain 2 versions of an ISP?
The question is, are they going to make their way to 2012? You said? No. No, it will be, the way we're going to deal with 2012 is via either guidelines on how to prepare your code and the code upgrade service that will actually convert your code to basically XMLs or elements that Dynamics 365 for operations understands.
I think, Robert, this question has come up before with ISVs that are maintaining a solution on 2012 and 7 that are refactoring their code for 7. Now, is there an easy way for them to maintain the code base in both? And of course, the easy way would be if we provide extensibility in 2012, which we won't.
Yeah. What might make it though is there are some changes to the application, like adding delegates and so on. I don't know if it's possible to. So there are some X++, at the X++ level or at the application level, it is possible for us to consider this. But, like having delegates and so on. But platform changes is not in the plan.
Yeah, the X++ changes would have to have the same platform patterns in 2012, so they have to be support there.
Right, and obviously some of what we're doing depends on app changes to support it, so it's really going to be incompatible in many ways. So.
The hard skill class will those be back black box, or will they still be able to debug and kind of figure out what's going on with them?
Debugging is the question?
Yeah, well, when you kind of hard skill,
Yes. Yeah, this same question came up in the previous. So the fact that we're sealing it from overlayering does not mean that we no longer ship the code, right? So you'll be able to see the code, you'll be able to debug it, you just won't be able to change it or overlayer it, right? So there's a clear difference between sealing it versus no longer shipping any code. There's no plans to stop shipping the code of the application.
And the code is a good documentation method too that a lot of developers like. So
right.
So we're not, because even looking at where we put our delegates in our own code and so on helps you understand how to subscribe to it and so on.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there is no plan to get rid of the code. No.
Yes.
I noticed that you mentioned that you're planning on extending support for display methods on tables. Are there any plans on adding display methods from a sensibility standpoint for forms?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so the question was display methods. And actually, you can already add display methods on tables today through extension. We just force you in a specific pattern of static methods, which we want to also allow you to do instance. But the question was, will we also support display and edit methods on forms themselves? And the answer is yes. That's been an issue that has come up, and that's something we're planning.
The slide is a little bit misworded. The point of that item is we want to support display and edit method on class extensions, which could be either table or form extensions.
There was a lot of talk about everything needs to be additive, yeah, with extensions. Have you thought about other methods than extensions to solve the situations where things need to be negative?
Yes.
We want to prevent things from running, like option on certain.
So this goes back to sort of the app side, right? Is there certain areas like inventory dimensions where we know if you want to add one, actually that one would be additive, but the way you do it today would be intrusive, right? So those two are, but those are essentially application functional issues we want to solve and see. Pricing was the other example. And I think we may run into issues I've also seen, especially, we haven't seen it in the ISV side much, but on the customer side, I see a lot of customers customizing credit checks, for example, in some cases almost entirely ripping out the existing code. In those types of cases, we have to look at, can we support something like the sys plugin framework or something like that, where essentially through inheritance, we allow you to just pass in your own, you just implement an interface for credit checks and you do whatever the hell you want, right? So those types of things, but those are really, and that's why we need the feedback and the telemetry to kind of find out. That's what we're saying, is some of it is not just a technology issue, some of it is a refactoring issue. In other cases, it's really a functional issue where we've also talked to ISVs that multiple ISVs effectively solving a bug in our code or a missing thing that they say, this is essential. Nobody would use this without this feature. Then it's on us to say, well, then we should probably just fix that, right? So it's a lot of case by case, a lot of scenario based, but it's absolutely true that in some cases, maybe we just need to provide you with a way to just pull in your own class entirely, which effectively replaces our functionality, right?
We got to get to a point where we have the extensibility points defined and we have to design for those, which is something that hasn't been a priority in the product in the past. So there's some technical debt for us to work through to get to that point.
So I guess the answer to the question is yes, it just has to be decided on a case-by-case basis, on a functional case-by-case basis.
This may be a bombshell question, but I know Microsoft is talking about a full on-prem solution. Are they going to allow a full
Who are they?
So-
I know of a customer that's very, very afraid of going cloud and didn't know if they would be able to upgrade with
Yeah.
a lot
So-
of overlaying.
Let me repeat the question, right? So the question was, with the announcements around on-prem and hybrid, would we consider allowing people that go with the on-prem solution to still do overlayering? I think our answer at this point is you want to look at why are we doing this, right? We're not doing this just so that because we want you to stop doing it. There's reasons for us. We want people to uptake new features. We want to stay current and those types of things. So at this point, we have no plans to deviate the on-prem solution from the, and in fact, we've already said, well, in a hybrid or edge model where the code base has to be the same anyway, so it'd be truly on-prem, we have no plans at this point to make any difference between our on-prem or, because we want the technology to stay the same. We don't want to maintain two separate platforms.
And we don't want ISVs and partners to
What-
have to do that either.
yeah. This is a very good question, and we keep thinking about it all the time. And there are no plans to do it, but we're not plugging out our capability to eventually do it, because there's a lot of. We're not basically taking the platform overlaying functionality and just drop the code and you know. So the plan right now is no. We do want one platform, whether it's on-prem or on-premise. Yeah, but
But it's a big, big change for AX2009 customers, user interface, processes, and everything is going to be so different that the only reason I propose this is to be able to more gradually move towards the new functionality where they have something already that they're doing differently, like
Correct.
warehousing. I mean,
But
warehousing is changing.
technically you can, like Dave mentioned, you can overlay until 2020. That's quite gradual somehow, right? So the requirements, if you look at our executives, when they gave us this work, they said, I want it tomorrow. And it's for us, we're saying, no, it can't be done tomorrow. And that's why we're following a deprecation schedule. And the platform took about a year, I would say, and we're giving the application a year and a half. But also, if you stick with the current version, you will be supported for 3 years. You don't have to upgrade.
What we lose if we don't move?
You're not going to innovate with us.
You lose new features that will come in the new feature. Yeah.
Kevin?
So you're adding all this stuff for the Microsoft ship code, but what about ISVs? Because we're having to build this classes, extension classes, augmented classes that are different. We understood some questions about on events in the augmented classes, which is not supported yet. But can we lock down our code, like our lock, so that other partners, other customers can customize our
Yeah. That's actually a great question. Today you can.
Repeat it, please.
Yeah, okay, yes. I will repeat the question. The question was, can ISVs lock down their own models because they want to actually follow the same models where, they don't want their partners to actually overlay and so on. So you can already do that today. It will be a functional lockdown, not a very hard lockdown. So the model descriptor file has a keyword called allow customizations. So if you set this to no, your customers or partners you're dealing with will not be able to overlay your model. If they do it, they're breaking a contract with you while going into the descriptor file and actually changing it to yes. So it's not it is a hard lock functionally, but if they want to cheat, they can cheat. But yes. But once we actually when we talk about hard locking in 2018, it will be across the board. Like the actual tooling will not allow you to customize anymore. So regardless of what model you're talking about. At least that's the plan. Unless we hear feedback that we need to give.
Yeah, I think there was in the previous session, there was people asking to still allow that. So something
And
we'll have
there's
to
actually
discuss.
documentation in the wiki about the attribute in the descriptor file today.
You can basically, if you think you're ready, if any ISV think they're ready, they can already lock their models starting today by just switching that flag in the descriptor file.
The other thing is the binary deployment, right? Which today already, even an ISV could ship the binaries and a customer can extend it. We know that that extensibility story on top of binaries as opposed to on top of code has some gaps in our tooling, which is something that we're looking at. That would be another way to go about that, is to say we ship the binaries, the customer can still see all of our forms and events and those types of things, can still debug, which we know today there's a gap there as well. So you'd have most of the features that you would have if you shipped code, but obviously because it's a binary, they can't overlay it there. Yeah, at this point you can't, I don't know. Well, we would, that's something we're, like I said, something we're looking at, right? We don't have any definitions. We have gotten a lot of requests to be able to debug binaries, which would imply that you can see the code. So we'd love to hear that feedback as what you would expect or not want, because that's something we know there's gaps in what people want, and yeah.
So we'll take one more, and we're about wrapping up, I think, at this point. We'll be up here afterwards, so go ahead.
Just clarifying the overlayering issue, but I asked Joris earlier if our customers would still be able to overlay our ISV code. And he told me yes, they
That is true.
Do you want me to tie break?
So let me try to repeat it. So the question, if I understand it, is by spring 2018, which is what we say. We're saying it's hard lock. There are two ways. The reason you got two answers because there are two ways to do it, and maybe we disagree on how to do it.
I made up the tie break.
So I have no say in this.
So we can either lock our models, any model that is in the sys layer shipped by Microsoft is locked, or we can just kill the feature. And the plan right now is to lock overlaying, but we are flexible there. We might just lock our models and allow ISVs, but then my guess is ISVs would want the same features as we do, so might end up being it's auto lock everywhere. But the platform has the capability to do both, and a decision has to be made sometime, maybe by the time we soft lock, as to if it's a for all or just for us.
Yeah.
I think ISVs usually do not deliver the model file because they also want to secure their code. So I think overlaying on ISV code is not something people play with.
That's correct.
I mean, there's clearly already one part of the room that says we want the overlayer, and so hence the,
We're getting a lot of feedback from the partners using ISV code that they don't like that, so not everybody is in sync on that decision.
Thanks, everyone.